why are we asking this? Today, it's really all about how our innovation work and brainstorming has changed, right? And I'm joined today by Colin, who is the CEO of Mosaic Innovation. He's been doing innovation work for the past 20 years, so a lot of experience in that regard, and has clients including HP, BT, Marriott, and Unilever, and he's been consulting them when it comes to innovation strategy and customer insight. So he's been in the room when brainstorming has worked really brilliantly, and also when they don't. So he has a lot of really practical insights to share with us on how this thing works and how his own workflows has been reshaped by AI and what it means practically for teams. So today's session is all about beyond brainstorming, and the challenge for us is really builds on the topics from the past two sessions. So if AI can already outperform teams, and we see this with speed, right? AIs can outperform teams on raw idea generation. So what do we actually bring people into the room for? So that's the challenge for us. If you also have your own experiences to share later on, like we'd love that. So feel free to share in chat, and we're also going to park time during Q&A. But okay, speed. With that sort of framing in mind, like Colin, off to you.
Yeah, thanks, Cheska, and nice to meet everyone. I'm looking at the responses and I see the word speed is the biggest, which I'm assuming means most people have submitted it in the word cloud, and words like efficiency. And it reminds me in November this year, we've got a Fortune 500 client, and their WISE procurement team sent us an RFI mandatory participation that said, give us all of your rates and tell us what AI tools you're using, how you're using them, and how much money you're going to save us going forward. And that is coming to everyone soon. And it's quite a scary prospect because we couldn't just say no. And we thought really long and hard. And we thought, actually, we are not trying to be more efficient. I mean, we are, in some ways, but our primary goal is actually all around reimagining workflows entirely, and 3x and 5x and or even 10x in the value we're delivering. You're thinking about it the wrong way. And I'm pleased to say we did make the cut because they looked at all their creative agencies and they bought the answer. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I guess my word would really be shockwave, because a shockwave is something that you really knocks everything in its path out the way and upends the current system. And I'd say we've really been all in on AI as opposed to just using it in a simple way of emails and etc. for about 2 years now. And I think almost every single aspect of the workflow has radically changed to the extent anything pre-AI we've almost put in the bin and started again from first principles. I picked today a couple of topics. One is how you do great brainstorming, because that's the sexiest and one of the most common. And then I'll also talk about how you do insight, so market research and unlocking innovation insight we talk about as well. And Jessica, if you can bring up the next visual, I thought I'd start with a kind of bird's eye view of how I'm seeing the world, and I'd love discussion and debate in this. But the big picture is the center of gravity has shifted. So pre-AI, the thinking and the doing were both important. So the ability, for example, to write compelling concepts that had, even proper nomenclature, reasons to believe, etc., or to do a market analysis, or even the technical skill of adding something like a CAGR, a compound annual growth line on Excel. When we were recruiting and working with teams, that was really important. Now that has been either automated or augmented to such an extent, it's becoming somewhat commodified, and the value is really shifting towards upstream. I'd say the biggest value is in how you frame the problem, and I'm going to give you a few examples of this later, but just my favorite fun one of old, and everyone always debates whether this story's true, but after the Cold War, when the Russians and the Americans met up, and they said, oh, we had this really interesting challenge. And they said, how did you guys develop the space pen? And seemingly NASA spent millions developing a pen that could write in space. And then the Russians, you probably all heard this, were like, oh, we just used a pencil, right? And it's a fun example of how people, if you give AI, you send it down the wrong track, you'll still get the wrong solution. And I'll give you, as I say, lots of examples got there. So that skill is, in my view, just the most critical skill around. The other one that's really important is how you interpret insight. So again, let's say you've done qualitative research. I'm sure many people do. So you've done, let's assume, real world customer interviews. If you put those in ChatGPT and Claude and said, do the analysis, the variance between them would still, as a minimum, be about 20% and often significantly more. So the values, you can't just outsource the thinking. You can outsource the basics if you were doing something like a usage and attitude study. How often is this referenced or what's the primary occasion? Absolutely find me quotes. But on the real value add, that skill is more important than ever, that curation skill. And then the other one as well is in the age of idea abundance and when prototyping costs, at least digitally, are becoming, close to zero, the ability to prioritize is more important than ever. And actually, again, that's something I'd argue is quite badly done. The customer needs 80% plus of innovation still fails. And a lot of people are saying, well, does customer needs matter if you can just throw a lot of stuff at the wall? But I always say it's a bit like drilling without any geology. It's just a really dumb thing to do. And particularly, we work in an enterprise context. So while generating ideas might be easy and like clickable prototypes, bringing something to market is still a huge effort involving lots of teams. So there are still bandwidths and bottlenecks. So that framing, prioritization, analysis is becoming, the critical skill. I think Cheska and I were talking just before the session began, and she'd ran, I think, yesterday a session with lots of consultant leaders and was saying, what are the key trends and themes? And they were saying, well, there's a lot of insourcing this clients doing stuff themselves, and particularly that stuff in the left. Clients don't really need lots of help from us on writing concepts anymore. They've got a template, they can feed it into AI and they can get pretty good. So you, as if I'm sure there are many consultants here or internal, you need to move upstream if you want to safeguard yourself against the AI. So I summed it up in a kind of tweet as less doing, more judgment is how I'm seeing it. But Cheska, do you agree or anything to add, or anyone else, please?
I think I wholly agree, but sometimes yeah, it's a bit hard to like it's much easier right now to get fooled because the models have really matured so well, especially Claude, that it's sometimes easy to find it really credible. So you need to be thorough in how you analyze it, and you need to be an expert in your own right. But yeah, fully agree with the judgment piece. Maybe there's anyone else who doesn't agree with this in the room. Would be curious to know what you think sort of reigns now.
I actually have a question around the generate ideas part of it. Is that okay? I mean, I know there's a lot of
Yeah,
people
please.
here. Okay.
Oh, please.
If everyone is operating from the same data, then the data itself becomes a commodity. And so it's really how you look at that data to generate an idea and the implications of that to inspire an idea. So I'm just curious about you putting the generate ideas in the pre-AI part of it.
Do you know what? If you don't mind, let's go to the next slide, which is how
Perfect.
we
I'm glad I
brainstorm, right?
operated as a
I'm
segue.
going to cover that, and then is it Hala? Sorry, I can't see your name. I'm going to come back to you and have an interaction because I want to have this discussion or even debate. But if we can skip on one, Cheska, or do you want to do the poll first?
No, we can skip through so you don't lose the
So,
train of
so
thought.
let me give you my view on the brainstorming, which incorporates this point. So in the pre-AI age, what you were doing, right, is you were trying to generate volume of ideas. You started typically from a blank page, or you'd have some structure and stimulus, and there was a bit of a volume, and you're building commitment. In the age of AI actually outperforms about 95% of people on idea generation, and that's both in novelty and customer exception. Now, there are exceptions when you're doing new to world, which most innovation, 80-90%, is either incremental or sustaining innovation. Sustaining innovation just really means it's within the existing business model. So let's say it's deodorant, and we're going to say, okay, It's still aerosol, it's still roll on, but we're wanting to have, I don't know, new reasons to believe slight R&D breakthroughs. It's rare we're doing the breakthrough. And in that instance, AI does have some limitations. But the way most people, and again, I'm really interested how people here are approaching it, they're doing a really bad job. And this is how we used to do it. So you go to your session, whether virtually or in the room, and you say to people, get your laptop out or get your phone out and generate ideas. And maybe you give them some feedback or some structure on the prompt, right? What's much more important these days in AI than the prompt is the context. So the big companies like, for example, both Unilever and P&G, they've actually, for their AI, uploaded a knowledge base of, in the case of, for example, deodorant, every single historical consumer study, all of the personas, all of the R&D, so that when they're working with creative partners or in these workshops, you're using that. And actually, the prompt is still important, but that is 2 to 3x. There's some studies from Google and Stanford on this. The context is critical. So whenever I see anyone operating and saying we're just freestyling without a project set up or a custom GPT, it's a really bad way to do it. The other thing I'd say in brainstorming when we do it is using voice is really good as well because you can speak at 3 times the rate you can type. And it's much more natural because if we're ideating Cheska and I as a pair in a breakout group, I don't have to say, hold on a minute, Cheska, I'm going hands down. And you speak in a way that's much more rich and vivid than you type, which tends to, cut stuff out as well. And then the other one, and a bit of a plug for Miro, is one of the worst things from a group dynamics and energy perspective, and the way a lot of people are using AI, is because we're getting our laptops out and our phone, we're in this session where it's all about energy and activity, and we're doing this, right? Whereas Miro actually, and it's only really in the last 3, 4 months they launched some AI tools, what they've done is on the board, you can now use, they've got a thing called a sidekick, which is like a custom GPT. So you can upload some context there, and then we'll show you an example in a bit. Put in your idea or a prompt, and it's going to visually spit out lots of post-its or whatever format you want. And the group is on the same page, right? So we can all see, oh, that's really cool. Let's go deeper here. Or if we're in breakout groups, the problem again with using AI on your phone or your laptop is it's very siloed. You generate 100 things. How do you integrate those to the group? How do you see the overlap? So the tools even I think this is only 3, 4 months ago, are fundamentally changing the game on that piece. So I don't think AI replaces the workshop, but it should certainly raise the starting point. The only other point I'd add is we sometimes now with clients where we're really aiming for, there is a trade-off between some of the more innovation theatre, human energy piece where some clients still want people to, frankly have a good day out. Where you're aiming for top quality, we'll often take in hunting grounds, so 6 to 8 opportunity platforms, and then we'll maybe pre-populate a dozen or 20 or 50 of the strongest ideas. And we're saying to the team, we actually want you to start today by heat mapping these and building off them because the values and fleshing the ideas out into concept and considering circumstance, capability, commercials, the value often actually in the core idea, the raw stuff, that's the point AI can do better. So if you just want dozens of different flavor variants, AI will nail that. Your human intelligence needs to be, again, more upstream, more on how you make the concepts fly. But I'll come back to Haley, what do you think of this answer? Are you going to challenge, convince?
No, I love it. I love the idea of it 3 time accelerates it because that then allows for the most obvious stuff to also be considered and then maybe go a bit deeper. And then it also allows for the humans to bring in the way that they approach innovation. And the AI can do part of that, but not all of it. And so, like the smaller signals, if that's someone's way that they look at innovation is to look at the smaller signals, then obviously AI can play that out for them pretty rapidly. So I like that. I think that's great and inspiring.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, the other thing I'd say as well is you can be a lot more sophisticated. So, as an example, one of the techniques we often use is called the 10 types of innovation. and it covers the product, which is everyone always thinks innovation equals feature, but also covers a bunch of types and business models, so process, like and customer experience, brand, etc. And it's got 121 tactics. Now that's just completely impractical in the pre-AI age. Now we can walk in and say, actually, we've applied this framework in advance. We've got it on the wall in a giant poster asset, or on Miro, we've set it up. So it's much more systematic, right? You can even get AI to start doing, how do you evaluate an idea? And in the pre-AI age, I'll tell you how we did it. It was a passionometer. I really like that idea. Not always for great reason, often because I was the one that generated it, or the name rhymed, or it was the thing I already had budget for. There was all kinds of stuff. Now we would use a framework, for example, like RICE. So RICE it's an acronym for reach, impact, cost, and effort. So it's giving you a lot more holistic and objective way. And it's interesting, actually, AI can change the group dynamics. We were here, AI's there, actually, we're thinking again. And the other thing, and this is a double-edged sword, is the emotional attachment to something that's been AI co-generated is very different. So if I've spent time in an idea and Jessica challenges me, historically, much as I'd say I wasn't, I tended to be quite defensive. I'm like, you don't understand, this is brilliant, blah, blah. If AI is generated and you give me builds, I'm much more receptive to moving that idea on. Now, the downside is if AI has generated some of the stuff in the initial phase, sometimes you have less of that ownership or passion, which actually is important for, particularly in a large organization, pushing things through. So that is the worry, and I've still not solved that. I don't have a clean answer on how do you keep that human ownership dimension. I'll just pause. Any questions, or I'd love to hear how other people are doing, or any tips you have.
Maybe one maybe naive question, because we like keep on hearing this idea of judgment and also be playing role of evaluator, right? But I'm curious to know how that would practically look like in a room when you're judging against like like AI sort of generated insights or ideas, because judgment can also be very personal and subjective, right? So it's like, how do you, yeah, sort of balance it out? That makes sense.
The great thing about so the way I was always told, and I used to when I worked at Deloitte, they had this method, plain to win. And the worst thing you can do with a client if they've a bad idea, which often happens, is to say, "Oh my God, Cheska, that's awful. What are you thinking?" Right? Even if it's correct, because you lose. The better way we were always trying to say is, okay, well, what would need to be true for this idea to work, right? And you can either start drawing some kind of a hypothesis tree or issue tree, and that's where AI is brilliant, because to do that exercise, we wouldn't be able to do it for the top 6 or 8 ideas because it would take an hour or two and lots of discussion debate. Now we can get a baseline instantly, and we can even overlay some probability simple numbers over it and say, that's really interesting. Or let's say it's the business model canvas, it's another tool. There's a big assumption here about you're going to have to change the segment, right? We have no experience, or we did this with a client in the food and drink space, and it was an idea for frozen. And it was the logistics person in the room who was really hostile and said, hold on a minute, that's going to require new trucks, right? We don't have the channels with these retailers. A lot of them don't have, like, a lot of your assumptions that seem really this prosaic, boring stuff totally changes. In fact, actually, just the cost of transport, because they were going from powder to liquids in one instance, they said, well, that doubles the transport costs. Are you going to, what's that going to do to the margin? It's that kind of discussion that before was happening in the post workshop or workshop 4 or 5. You're bringing into workshop 1 because you're not burning the energy on just the basics, the baseline.
Thank you. That's super helpful in terms of the practicalities of how it works. Okay, sorry, you want to move to the next one, or any other questions or thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I think a question is this a public board? I'm happy to share the slides if that's possible, or make the board public. Yeah.
That would be lovely. I think people would definitely. We're gonna share all of these resources after the session, so you can also add in your thoughts after.
And like I do see someone's put, I'm a bit skeptical about outsourcing our thinking to AI. So I think it's a really good point. I wouldn't outsource the thinking, but I probably would outsource the baseline. because there's no real downside to do it. Sometimes I see AI output and I think it's dreadful, right? Or there's no novelty. So you can reject it, but why would you not? It's a bit like saying I've got an expert outside, you want to consult them. Well, you might as well if it's free of charge and they're there and you can do as you will. But I thought, yeah, we can move on to the other area. And I said that problem framing is probably the number one skill in innovation, right? If you use the wrong frame, you can just drill down into the wrong area. And most companies, particularly the way they think about customers and insight, is all wrong. So almost everyone is doing classical insight design thinking of product pains and gains. Very few are looking through what we call a jobs to be done lens. So, what is the underlying goal? And I think this quote illustrates it well. So, the electric light didn't come from the continuous improvement of the candle. Or another fun example is imagine you made kettles to boil water, right? And we said, let's do innovation. Almost all teams, traditional approach would be doing new features to make the world's best kettle. Then you look at somebody like Nespresso who's said, well, what is the underlying goal? It's to make a coffee, and that just reframes you in a totally different direction. I did a previous webinar with Miro actually on jobs to be done if anyone's interested, so you can check it out. But I thought I'd just talk about how insight is changing, and if we go to the next slide, yeah, when you've got the opinion to generate infinite ideas quickly, and there used to be a proxy sometime in like the quality of the articulation correlated often to how good the idea was because it implied thinking. Now with AI, actually, there's a lot of specious ideas, so they look and sound great, but they're actually shallow or they're not thought through, and it's hard to tell the difference. And I thought this idea of like people talk about AI slop. In innovation, we're getting this idea slop where because people are hungry to innovate and innovation in most people's mind erroneously equates to features, what we're seeing sometimes is just roadmaps that are just absolutely enormous with stuff. And it's just, I pasted this is a real world example from Amazon. It's for a television listing. And sorry, I know you can't read it, it's not an eye test. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this is gobbledygook for most consumers, right? You're increasing cost, you're increasing complexity, but you're not increasing value. And that's what the real skill in insight is. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how to avoid that. So the way we're seeing it is in any insight process we do, and I'm talking here about discovery insight rather than validation. So you're trying to find ideally unmet needs, which is really hard, particularly in mature competitive categories. We always, in any project we put through, we say we're going to do an AI analysis first. So we're going to use synthetic insight. Now, the way I'd say not to do that and how most people still do it is they'll put the challenge and say, what do you think customers will think? And then they get the output. Now, it's better than nothing, but the better way to do it, and we've tried this, is get our discussion guide, identify personas, upload all of that, and then ask the AI to simulate the conversation. So the AI actually has a full-blown conversation with itself. And you want to get it to do that by about like 30, 40 times, depending on the scale of your challenge and number of segments. And then on the basis of the transcripts, get it to analyze the synthetic transcripts for the insight. The reason being is if you give it diverse personas and multiple interactions, you avoid some of that challenge that was mentioned earlier, which AI is a bit of an averaging machine. So it'll start looking at more outliers, anomalous areas, etc. And what we're trying to do with the AI is generally it's not to replace human insight. I don't think that will happen, but we're trying to surface the obvious, right? The foundational stuff. And we're trying to identify, because research is always time and effort limited, where do we prioritize our resources? So we use a methodology called jobs to be done. And one of the things we'll do in that is to map the job steps. So if it was with Miro, for example, and they said, how do we improve the job of facilitate a creative workshop? We're going to be mapping out steps like, invite attendees or Q&A or like capture information. We want the AI to give us a bit of a heat map so that we can say, look, based on that, we think the biggest opportunity, and this was a real pain point Miro had, was capturing the information post-session because taking all those stickies, putting them into PowerPoint or something was a nightmare. So that means then we can spend our time going really deep in the human insight rather than going really broad. I mean, the other thing I'd say is you can't ignore the AI insight and qualitative research. So all discovery almost is qualitative. We would always recommend validating it anyway, either through quant, so a survey, or ideally as well, maybe some experiments too. So it's not as though you're taking ever AI insight as gospel, but it just, as I say, gives you that head start. And if you're an entrepreneur and maybe can't afford insight, or even some of our clients, we have one client who's running 300 innovation projects in their B2B division. And they say, look, we can only afford to do discovery insight realistically on 40 to 50. So this, when they're doing inputs for sessions like value proposition canvas, is absolutely transformational. But again, I'm going to pause there. I spoke a lot and say I'm sure I'm going to get challenged really hard for anybody who works in Insight who says, what are you talking about? And I have been challenged on this, so please go ahead.
Maybe I'll share. I'm not entirely, oh, okay. Sylvia has a question. Can you elaborate more on the contribution to value prop canvas for
Yeah,
sharing?
so value proposition, what you're doing here is meant to be rooted in a jobs to be done basis, right? But it's actually often quite like superficial because the way needs are captured, people are talking about like give you an example. If we were to say find cheap airfares quickly, people are saying, well, that's a clear job to be done. But actually, if you look at the methodology properly, what we try and do is separate the core functional job, which is to find an airfare, from the cheap and the quickly, because we want to actually map out systematically every single desired outcome. So we call them the success metrics. Usually there's dozens, and we want to translate them into precise statements for value creation. So the way people are doing the value proposition canvas, and I get they're following the book, but their inputs from what we often see are quite rudimentary and basic. Like the base customer need is often not well articulated or understood. So you're often operating on quite shaky assumptions. And that's how the synthetic insight can be really good because you can actually say, okay, well, for any core job, there are often like a dozen little jobs and even going into hundreds of micro jobs. To get that level of granularity, it just wasn't possible. It wasn't practical before. Now you can, so you can start that session on a much more solid foundation. You can also actually the other way we use it is like once we ran a session, we'll always validate it and say like, is there anything we've missed? So you're fleshing the canvas out. Someone's asked, actually, can you see a live example of AI? So why don't we do that, Jessica, so we don't
Yeah, sure.
disappoint you?
Since people are asking for it, that's good. You want to go with the scamper example?
Yeah, let's do that. So I don't know if people are aware, so because it's quite new. I think it's about 3 months old. This purple button Jessica's clicking, this is the Sidekick library, which is like custom GPTs. And we've created several. One of the simple ones we created is this thing called Scamper. So it's an acronym that stands for, well, you'll see on the screen that several things. And the idea is it gives you 7 lenses to stretch any idea. So when we're in a session, and Cheska's going to give the example there. It's like imagine the idea in the session was it's chefs on demand who are going to come to your house, Uber style, and cook your dinner, right? Really cool. The team's excited. How could we take that in different directions? So she just put in that one line prompt, and you're about to see, assuming the AI works, what happens.
Okay. While it's generating, I did have one question around just going back to the outsourcing, the foundational or baseline insight. Like sometimes it's at least based on my experience, you only understand the ambiguous signals that or the foundation for human insight when you're actually deep into analyzing the data upfront. Like how do you how do you make sure that we don't lose sense of that when we outsource the initial part of the thinking?
Yeah, I know what you mean. The human connect. I mean, I always say when we do insight to client, it's really important you attend some of the interviews for the visceral first-hand connection. What I'd say, I mean, we're slightly biased because we do enterprise, so it's very rare we work with a client who doesn't have an abundance of insight. So if I give you an example of deodorant, which we did last year, the client had all these research documents. Pre-AI, when we worked with this client, we did a 4-month project, and the first 2 weeks were called Rewind. And all we were doing was going through every single data point and synthesizing. So that's where AI is phenomenal for drawn out. And also in a lot of categories, you get quite a lot of secondary data. So for example, it's like a usage and attitude report where it'll tell you, where do you buy when, what are the top reasons dissatisfaction. So that's what I'm considering foundational insight to me is stuff that's fairly obvious, but is still really important to make explicit. And that means you can then be focused on, well, what are the inspirational insights, meaning that it's anomalous, it's an emerging trend, it's like what's, I don't know, like the disruptive thing or the contradictions as well, so that you're not stuck in just like the stuff people have already seen.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Colin. Makes sense. Okay, now that we have it here, you want to run them through the methodology and also what to zoom in on?
Yeah, so I mentioned Scamper. I'm sure many people have heard. It's one of the famous ideation tools, and it's stands for. I'll not go through all of them, but like substitute, right? So is there something in this idea you can replace? And when we ran this earlier, one of the blue post-its here was saying, well, what if rather than professional chefs, you got culinary students in? Because that would then make it a lot cheaper, and maybe you could do some really nice messaging around employing the youth and stuff. And it's an idea that, like, it's not immediately obvious, but it's certainly interesting. Whether it's good or not, it's debatable. But you're seeing here, you've got what, 7 lenses, and then you've got like 4 or 5 post-its each. So you're getting 30 plus provocations on an existing idea instantly. And remember, we've picked Scamper because it's a simple, easy to understand one. We've also got these sidekicks for areas like the 10 types of innovation or like some of the stuff around I mentioned jobs to be done. So you can create a jobs map. And you can also do varied formats. So in this instance, it's sticky notes, but you can do, other ones. And I'll mention, seeing we're talking about insight, the other Miro AI tool is called Flows. And the idea with a flow is you can dump a lot of information. So in our case, my primary use case is we do user interviews, so discovery or validation, put the PDF and you just literally drag and drop. And then you can actually just click a little arrow and say, give us a summary of that insight. And you can say, I don't know, structure it in a table, as in what are the top pain points, right, or the top unmet needs. And that's really cool because before, like, you would not be able to do that collaboratively. We would have had to have written a research report and take. And whenever you produce an asset, and if Cheska's my client, it then becomes, oh, that's your analysis. It's harder to disagree with. When you can do it real time collaboratively, just to say, well, what if we do that? Or how can we recut the data? Or I'm surprised, or we need to go deeper. So it's really cool for like if you're rather than waiting to the end of a process, like doing all the research interviews, we can upload them in real time one at a time and say, right, give us a summary, update the summary. So, and super easy to use. So we're using this a lot.
So we can also do after is a lot of these are actually already compiled into templates. Happy to share resources as well after the session. So you can practically take some of these tools that we have built into Miro and try it out for some of for some of your own work. Yes, Sylvia, we'll do that. Okay, Colin, you want to share more here or go back to I'm gonna take the cue from you.
Any questions about this, the sidekick or the flows or scamper, or is it all? It is really easy to use, honestly. I'm not very techy, and I figured it out pretty quickly.
Personally as well, I mean, if you run a lot of these workshops on Miro, what one easy thing that you can do is also when you're doing recaps and documentation, you can actually create like formatted documents already after the workshop to compile your recaps and summaries, or even AI slide gen is another thing. So to make that documentation much easier, because at least based on our experience, like we see a lot of people where that really is much more time consuming for them. So you can do that here too. Okay, I'm gonna stop because I'm a bit biased, obviously, with Miro. I want to make sure we focus on the learning in session.
No, that's cool. I mean, the other thing, just because we're talking about tool stack to say like, well, what super practically are you using? We experimented on Insight with the synthetic platform. So there's a few that promise they've got all this rich data set and personas, and we literally split test that against some of the LLMs, and the general LLMs in our experience just outperformed them. So we didn't see any advantage in specialist software. We also tested all of the LLMs by giving it transcripts and looking at accuracy and novelty, etc. Now, I would have said that about 3 months ago, Claude was just so much better for qualitative analysis. It's unreal. But then you get the latest update to chat, it was 5.3, 5.4, and actually it's closed. But the biggest advice, data security aside, because client can restrict that, I'd always say when you're in any process in AI with innovation, we would always ideally duplicate the process across two LLMs because it's just like having two experts, whether that's ideation, insight analysis, or other, because we're actually giving it the same prompt and then it gives you, those two variances. And as I say, it's a jagged frontier. So it's not like they're a little bit different in some instances, they're like fundamentally different. And that comes back to the critical thinking. You're still the driver. You're not just, I think sometimes you say AI and people think you're lazy. It's about cutting and pasting, or it's about switching off your thinking. You're now actually orchestrating more than you're doing, if that makes sense. I'll just cover it. I didn't put any visuals on it, but in terms of the rest of the innovation process, so the next stage, once you have discovery, you've done some form of ideation, prototyping now, and I mean this in a digital context, we use lots of tools now. So like Lovable, Replit, sometimes the clients have their own tool. And the biggest change here is the democratization. So historically, if we, for example, ran a design sprint, which involves 1 day or 2 days when you would take an idea and make it into something clickable or maybe even something physical, you had to rely on a designer. So I, if Jessica's my designer, I'm giving her a brief and giving her feedback, and there's a bottleneck. Where we've now evolved, if we do a design sprint, and typically we'd have 70, maybe 9 people in there, we're saying to them, look, individually or in pairs, every single one of you can now build your own prototype, right? Because you can do it using natural language. And the challenge before as well is, it still needs to look good, but you can easily now upload, if you're again an enterprise, like a image library with all your branded assets. So people are able to now, in the space of hours, come back with something that's clickable and cool. And user testing is actually, and I'm talking about the human side here, fairly cheap. So to go from what we were testing one idea to testing five or six, the cost differential is absolutely minimal. So you're able to throw in so many more ideas to the ideas hopper. So that has been really transformational as well.
So,
Sorry for your risk, so much.
oh, no, 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 no. I was just like taking the cue from you from so right now, like I think Colin has shared a lot of his own examples. So we're also curious to hear from you, from everyone in the room, in terms of what's the biggest, because again, let's take advantage of the people who, the hive mind in this crowd, right? So very curious to understand what's the biggest bottleneck in your current workshop or ideation process. And what we'd love to do now is actually try to help each other, or maybe also get Colin's expertise in terms of how he sort of addressed similar challenges. I can see some thank you to Alex and Nicole for being the first to start. If you just joined us a bit late and haven't participated in Engage yet, just feel free to scan the QR code on the screen or join with this link to share your answers. Colin, you want to take the first few ones and share like how you sort of normally address them?
Yeah, sure. Alexander, you're saying time. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Purely
Alex,
from
feel free to unmute.
purely from a philosophical and practical point of view, um, if I had 48 hours in a day, my ideas would be much deeper, broader, etc. So it's to me, it's just a matter of time as resource.
Yeah. My top productivity tip, and I'm honestly not paid by these people, is I rarely type anymore. I'm now 100% voice, and I don't just mean AI, I mean emails, I mean WhatsApp, and I'm using a tool called Whisperflow, WISPR, and it's workflow. The reason that's phenomenal is it's not transcription, where because we don't speak how we type, what it's doing
Col-
is getting the way I talk and then translating it into, something that makes sense. And it's three times the speed of typing. So just purely to get more time,
Col-
that would be my number one
Colin,
habit.
Colin, it's quite a coincidence, but I already shared in the chat that I use Whisperflow as well.
Oh wow.
I pasted the URL in it. I totally agree. It's so much more efficient, three times faster speaking, and it even corrects you with the sidestep of the AI that's being used inside it. So I already use it. Yeah,
Okay, you're ahead of the curve. Yeah.
no worries, no
Um,
worries.
what about let's look at our one then. So, Nicole, what's your comms challenge?
So I guess
Oh, oh, there.
sorry. I guess it's less of a communication challenge and more of, I guess, a mixture of communication and documentation and just making sure everybody's on the same page when it comes to like brainstorming and that kind of stuff.
I mean, let me give just a few thoughts on comms, right? I'll give you one, I'll give you a tool recommendation because it's really cool. Just purely for slides, there's a tool called GenSpark, GenSpark. That is phenomenal compared to any other AI tool. I've used all of them, and that will save you time and can make your slides look very slick. It also is Nana Banana, which means you can, instead of doing PowerPoint, you can do like the illustrations I have today on the Miro board were made using that tool in seconds, so you can bring your work to life in new ways. Another point on comms that I think AI's changed is pre-AI, we did this really complex project for a hospitality client. So it was the hotels, four different brands. It was across design, food and beverage, what else? Programming and a bunch of stuff. So we wrote a 100-page report. And the feedback from the client is, what are you thinking? No one has time to read this, right? So we gave them a 20-page report. 2 months later, they started doing a load of ideas we said you shouldn't do. And it was so frustrating. And then we thought, well, how can AI change how we communicate? So in the current project we're doing as an example, we've got the detailed 100+ page report, but that's now as a wiki. So it's Claude and a GitHub integration, which makes the thing super easy to navigate and search. So if you're just an F&B and you just want that one brand, you can cut the data. And then we're giving clients a much shorter, more visual storytelling piece on the deck. So the deck might only be 20 slides now. So it's changing just the art of what's possible. We also gave another client like a really detailed roadmap because AI can just help you produce so many assets. But sorry, you were asking actually, was it more in a brainstorming context, the communication?
No, you definitely answered. That last example was really helpful.
Yeah, I can't recommend Gen. Again, I'm not paid, but GenSpark for even for actually does Word as well, but it's just 10x better than any other tool.
Good recommendation.
Um,
I think we're all gonna check that out. Um, anyone, if someone also wants to share, and unmute, feel free to just raise your hand, because I know we don't want to put you on the spot by calling calling you out. So I encourage
you,
you to just raise your hand. Going through here, anything else that's interesting to you that you want to share on, Colin? Actually, here,
um,
participation. That's still, I think, like, given how many workshops I sit in on, that's still a big challenge.
Yeah, that was
yeah,
mine. You get a
And
few, you kind of get the same people show up all the time. So it's always, in our in some of the stuff that we try to do, we try to get more the more the merrier, right? I think the more ideas, the better. But
Yeah.
if the same 10 people keep showing up, then you're kind of stuck with their ideas.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'll be honest, we have not overly experimented with because this enables whole new stuff around like crowdsourcing, right? We always used to talk about it and no one used to do it because it lived in SharePoint. And there is a huge opportunity to throw that to a whole organization and say, like, we're having this kind of problem. In terms of the quiet group phenomenon, though, like that is something now that you can actually design some cool exercises. So, as an example, culturally, when we worked in certain Asian cultures, a lot of people have virtually camera off and it can be hierarchical. So, they do not want to, as I'm calling wrongly, Jessica's great, people today to call people out. So, that is you can now actually design stuff like, okay, we're going to do like an interactive quiz, right? Now, to do that before AI, that was a major effort. But now you can just give AI the problem and say, like, I've got quiet people. Here's the topic. Give me an engaging format to do this in, right? Or you can upload your session plan. And as Cheska's done today again, where she's got a few polls and she's got whatever, then you can say, like, is this interactive enough, right? Or like, the dream for Miro, and this is a product recommendation, is we almost need prompts because there's people like me that monologue too much, right? To say like, oh, you should like Tim's light should flash up red and say he hasn't spoken for 5 minutes. Like check in with him. So yeah, but sorry, not many great insights on that one.
A bit of a spinner though. Like, are there still certain things in innovation work where you really would not use AI? Because we touched on most of the things which would change, but
You know, I'm trying like the political answers you're meant to say, yeah, of course not. There's some things that shouldn't touch. Now, data security aside, right, and like trade
yeah.
secrets, because there's some stuff. Honestly, no. Like I'm such a cyborg and AI first. I would really struggle to think of an instance where I wouldn't use AI in even a non-comprehensive way. Like it's my first port of call for everything. And that's not because I'm lazy. It's because it's like it's helping me just operate it, like a cyborg. Like I'm like, how do I become like a super worker? And so my honest answer is I cannot readily think without an extreme example of an instance where I wouldn't use AI. I mean, does anyone have any instances where you wouldn't use AI? I'm sure there are, and I'm just not aware of them, or maybe I'm drank the Kool-Aid too much.
Anyone who's not operating like a cyborg for now, quick thumbs up actually. Who here has AI as port of contact, first contact? And then if you don't have, use this one. Just a quick race of use of emojis to get a sense of the room. Personally, I'm with you, Colin. Sometimes I also worry that it's the first thing that I sometimes do. I would sense check, even not just with business. Okay, wow, Richard. Richard is a non, like that's not the first part that he does. You want to share a bit more? And that it's also okay.
It just depends on what I'm doing at the time, but sometimes, yeah, look, it's very easy to get started with it, but um, I suppose the opportunity just to think a little bit more,
Yeah,
you
but
know,
yeah. I,
it,
I,
it's
I'd
it's very easy to start off with something, look, really quickly, and I just feel, but sometimes I think it's nice just to take time and think a little bit if you can, I suppose, if you have time to.
in this, I was talking about a friend yesterday, and I was talking about AI, and he was hesitant for various reasons. And I said, but I'm not always in an innovation process saying, right, give me ideas. I might be saying, how do you think I should approach this problem? Like, what are the different frames? So we did telco loyalty. So their NPS was really bad. And my approach to that was to do an issue tree. And I said, well, what are all of the drivers of NPS, right? And it was stuff like comms and brand, price and customer service. And I said, okay, give me a level two. And then I started thinking, okay, well, for what was going on with this telco, where do I think the big levers are and why? And then I started generating ideas under those. And then in the first session, I took it to the client and said, look, here is a map, and this is where I've red, amber, green, where I think we should focus the ideation. I mean, they said it was wrong, but that even by itself was useful. So I think it kind of depends how you're using it. If you're just, I wouldn't just say like solve the problem because, that doesn't work. One other thing I just put in, this is a bit unrelated, but a lot of people are still worried about, and you see all these reports, the hallucination, right, and the error, and you've egg in your face. I'd say to that, the answer is generally more AI to fix it, which I know sounds crazy, but you can fact check output. So if you are in innovation and you've got technical claims, and we will move at 100 miles an hour, for any final deliverable, I'm saying today, okay, I want a fact check. And again, Natural Gen Spark is one, or Perplexity is quite good, where it can do a model counsel. And it won't just tell you binary because the real world's not that close. It'll tell you, like, well, this is probably true, right? Because we did one with a big Caribbean client, and there was some stuff there. They're saying, where are you getting this from? And it was like, okay, well, this is a composite because it's a complex area, but here are the, sentiments. So that's really important as well, because you do lose credibility if you put slop in that's wrong.
Yeah. Thanks.
So we have 5 minutes left. So I think thank you so much to everyone for all the sharing and all the questions. I think Colin, you seem like a real AI geek. So we'd love to see some of these workflows and tool recommendations compiled, because I think that would be quite interesting for everyone to see. And we also promised that for the Miro AI workflows and sidekicks, I'd be happy to share over some resources. There was a lot that we covered today, but I think one of the key things is that Colin sort of shared is around what AI is really good at in terms of the whole brainstorming process, from idea generation, drafting to analysis, and how we sort of need to move the value upstream. They said that really resonated with me. Like in terms of where we focus on framing problems and ideas, prioritization, using human judgment when it comes to insight, and also where we can outsource the work per se, or at least the foundational work, and use AI a bit more to save ourselves time and effort and get the baseline right, of course. So hopefully a lot of what he shared today also helped out in terms of your own thinking. And if you have more insights to share, please, this is a continuous series for us. We have 2 more to go, so we'd love to see you in the next session. Thank you to Colin. Let's give him a big round of applause or emoji for sharing and doing this TED Talk with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I'm on LinkedIn, so if anyone wants a one-to-one or questions, feel free or not, I'm happy to share the tools and all the rest of it. But yeah, nice to briefly meet you all.
Really lovely. And I'm going to be dropping in our LinkedIn here, actually. So if anyone wants to connect with Colin, please do follow his work. He's doing really amazing work with Mosaic. And also he's contributed a lot to Miro. So check out his sidekicks and his work. I'm dropping his LinkedIn here and mine. If you want to connect about contributing to the community we're building, please do so. And I really hope to see you guys in our next session. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Colin.